So today, like I said, we'll be getting into positive externalities and talking about public goods a little bit. We'll start out with a talk on policy, then move into some issues that we have with our public goods. So we ended last time introducing these tools, and today we kind of dive into them a little bit more. So the main policies we have, well, the first policy that we introduced was a to help reward our parties for creating these positive externalities. We want them to share some of that social benefit. So we want to reward them. And the main tools that we mentioned last time were intellectual property rights, right? So if you come up with something, you have some exclusive rights to it. Then we had our subsidies where, government's going to help pitch in. Examples of subsidies we saw were the essential air service that we talked about with our uh, from deregulation of the airlines, as well as if you think about like Amtrak or things like that, where part of your ticket is paid for by you, but another part, and probably a very fairly large part, is paid for by the government. Then we can also offer tax credits, which we saw conversations about. Right? How come if Amazon says we're going to open up a new office, why are cities bidding with them and doing everything they can to try to bring Amazon into their city? Right, so we have those, and that's what we're getting into. And today we're looking at those ones that really create that incentive to innovate. So looking more at the uh, property rights as well as assisting with research and so on. So the first bit is our intellectual property rights, and we kind of talked about these with the monopoly. This is a legal monopoly, or these establish a legal monopoly. And what these do is they basically say, hey, if you make something or you invent or you create content, you have the right to distribute it. You have the right to decide how it gets distributed, how it gets sold, and so on. So with our intellectual property rights, the two big things we got into, or two big things we're looking at today, we talked about monopolies, we talked about trade secrets, and a few other things. But today we're going to look more at, or we're going to mention, I guess, patents and copyright laws. So again, patents. If I invent something, I have exclusive right to make, use, or sell it for some amount of time. I believe for something like prescription, that's for something like your drugs, your pharmaceuticals, that's something like 7 years. I think 7 years is a pretty common patent length. The other type of property right we see is our copyright laws, which say, hey, if I write something or I create content, I have the right to decide how it gets distributed, sold, etc. So if I make a song or I make a movie or I make a set of notes or a book or something like that, I as the author get to decide how that gets distributed. Or I could have signed that right away to the place I work for, and then my workplace gets to decide that. So it depends kind of on it. A little bit depends on the situation, depends on who we're talking about. But when we think about our copyright laws, in general, the at least most of them, and we have some things where there's copyright law is still kind of up for interpretation. But the general rule of thumb is that a copyright lasts, and I believe this is what's officially written in the books. A copyright lasts until for the rest of the author's life plus 70 years. So if I write a song and then uh, some freak accident happens tomorrow and I die tomorrow, granted I'm not writing a song, so not really setting myself up. But if you write a song and then tomorrow, you die, that copyright will stay with your estate basically for 70 years after your death. Um, the area where this gets tricky is often be corporate copyright. So one of the big things we might mention is Mickey Mouse, right? When does Mickey Mouse enter the public domain? And uh, Walt Disney died in 1966. So So according to the idea, Mickey Mouse, meaning basically the head figure of Disney, should enter the public domain in 2036. But we may see this not happen because Disney might say, well, right, the Disney company might say this is our trademark, this is our thing. So something like that, corporate corporate copyright can kind of get more complicated than just my nice little, oh, I made a set of notes, so 70 years after I die. Instead, this corporate copyright again can get a little more complicated, and it may be hard to say, well, you know, we can't necessarily say that, oh, yeah, Mickey Mouse is going to enter the public domain at 2036. And if once Mickey is in public domain, that basically means uh, anybody can use Mickey Mouse, anything, basically the trademark that Disney has over Mickey Mouse would then be gone. So right, we have that thing that comes up, and again, copyright, it can be tricky, but the basic idea of it is if you write something, you get to determine how it's distributed. If there's revenue made off of it, you get to see that revenue. So if you watch YouTube, a lot of your content creators are very careful about what songs they let through. So if someone's doing like a tour of a mall or a tour of a theme park or something, and a popular song comes on in the background, they need to be very careful to either only let a few seconds of that song play or to actually dub it out, because if they don't, they could excuse me. If they don't, the creators of that song could come after them and put a copyright claim on it, which then takes uh, the video creators' revenues away from the ads. So, right, we have those copyright laws and intellectual property rights. The next thing that the government can do is, and again, thinking more on the innovation side right now, is actually spend money on research and development. So it could be the case the private sector doesn't have, but by itself, doesn't have the incentive to actually do the research. And a part of the reason we'll see for this is a free rider issue, which we'll discuss uh, towards the end of today. But with this, with our research, what we may see is a company or a firm does not want to come in, spend the money for research, take the time, the money, and the resources to research and develop these new innovations and ideas just for somebody else to come in and take it and or use it without having to have contributed to that research. So what the government can do is they can say, all right, look, we're going to give you something along the lines of a grant, or we're going to help fund your research, with the idea being that with the government funding, that's basically taking that research as ownership from the firm back to the public. So the government helps pay for this research, uh, and then anybody can use um, the innovation that's developed through this research. So in doing this, the government does provide support for colleges, universities. So, oops. So if you ever hear about like a professor writing a grant application, right? They're saying, "Hey, I want my research to be funded, so I'm going to write a grant for the federal government, or maybe even a private company, or maybe even like a nonprofit, or even a private company by itself to help support this research." Second thing, we have our nonprofit research entities. So these are folks who, like we said, they're nonprofits. So they, you know, they do research just like universities do, um, but they may not be as much on the academic side, or they may not be focusing as much on um, the education side of things. Private firms can also do their own research. They can again get funded by the they can again be funded by the government. So Ford can say, "Hey, we're gonna try and develop this new thing." The government might say, "Hey, we'll help pay for it," with the idea that again, this innovation gets spread to everybody. Uh, then we also have government-run laboratories. So Department of Energy has a fairly decent sized laboratory program. If you get the chance, if you're ever around Gatlinburg, Tennessee, Somewhere around there is Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and in Oak Ridge was one of the energy laboratories where where the nuclear bomb was like developed, and a big part of the Manhattan Project. It's a neat little museum they have in what it used to be. It's now a neat little museum about energy and a little bit about the bomb itself. But if you're in that area, just a cool like a little cool thing. But it was a former government laboratory. Now it's a uh, museum. So right, so we have these four big areas where, again, government can provide support for research and development. They can come in and, again, help support it, with the idea, again, being that if we receive this public grant, um, so if you receive this public grant, then you will be more open to the idea of being available to the public, because it's not like, well, I just did all this work and now I did all this work and now everyone else is going to free ride off of me, right? We don't really have that issue with if you received a grant and had it funded. Then the third bit that we have is a potential tax break. And a tax break's going to work like the grant. It's just pretty much the kind of the opposite way. So whereas the grant, I get paid up front. If I have a tax break, I'm going to kind of just not have to pay in as much taxes. So we might say, well, you contributed to society and you provided the public a great service. So because of the service you provided the public, we're going to give you a tax break. And tax breaks are similar to subsidies. The difference being, again, instead of uh, you receiving money whenever, instead of you receiving this income whenever the payday for government grants are, you instead basically get a deduction on your taxes, so you don't pay as much into the government, right? Kind of two two sides of the same coin, just different ways of looking at it. Then you can also then with our research, we can also cooperate and make things work. So we don't necessarily have to come out and do all of our research by ourselves. Instead, again, if we cooperate, uh, things can work out, and you can partner and you can have grants for innovation. If you look at some of the projects that are going on, you'll see that not everything is necessarily done just by one place. And even if you look at something like OpenStax, which is actually a really nice example of this, I believe they receive grants from National Science Foundation and some government grants that help pay for it. But also, you have private companies like the Koch Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that also um, help support the open the textbook, right? So you have these. So it's not necessarily just, oh well, Ford's going to do this and they're on their own, right? Instead, there may be a partnership between even maybe Ford, GM, and Chrysler all partner together to come up with new research or come up with new innovations, or whatever the case is. Or uh, you may have a partnership between the University of Iowa with their they have like a driving lab, so they have like a driving simulator. You can partner them with Ford or them with Chrysler, GM, whoever you want. It can work out fairly well for us. So we have the cooperative research, which again just helps with that research and development and so on. So I mentioned that firms don't have an incentive to actually do the research by themselves. And the reason for that is because knowledge is largely a public good. That is, if word gets out about something, there's not really a way for me to say, you can't use that knowledge, right? I can't say, well, you're not allowed to know about supply and demand, right? If you know about it, you know about it. Um, right. And that's the interesting thing about like propaganda. If you think about like propaganda and stuff, right? If you try and censor knowledge, or you try and say, oh yeah, well, you try and censor like what the outside world is like, kind of like what a lot of your dictator countries will do. Um, you know, once information gets in, you can't really tell people, oh yeah, you can't know that unless you do bad things. But when you think about our public goods, of which innovation would be one, uh, we're going to see that these are again, these are non-excludable and non-rivalrous, which we talked about at the beginning of our last chapter. But a couple examples. Oops, I do have this. So goods non-excludable, non-rivalrous. So it's hard again to. So difficulty of public goods. Since I cannot exclude you from using them, and since your consumption doesn't hinder other people's use of them, we see two things. One, uh, I can't prevent you from using the good, right? Because it's not excludable, or it'd be very expensive to prevent you from using my good. But also, with them being non-rivalrous, it's going to be hard for other people to potentially tell on you, or hard for other people to, to rat you out, basically. So basically, nobody's going to be hurt by you using the good, and there's no way for me to prevent you from using the good. So examples of public goods, again, are one, information, but the common examples that we mentioned are fire and police service, as well as something like national defense. Again, we don't say, if you call 911 and say, hey, I'm being robbed, right? They're not going to say, well, did you pay your taxes last year? If you did, you get police service. If you don't, they say, well, tough luck. Similarly, if you think about like national defense, the IRS does not send the coordinates of everybody who didn't pay taxes and say, all right, these houses are fair game if the taxpayers are not, right? Instead, our national defense protects the entire country. And same thing, police and fire, uh, they don't they don't sit and say, well, you didn't pay taxes, so you don't receive police service, right? So that's what we see with our public goods. So the issue that I mentioned, again, it's difficult to sell these goods because of this issue called the free rider problem. So basically, we have people who they don't want to pay for the goods they consume, right? That is, they want others to pay for this public good, but then they want to actually use the good themselves. And the issue with the free rider problem, again, there's no way to prevent free riders from using public goods. But excuse me, since the free rider's use of our goods doesn't affect my use of it, if I'm not a free rider, I might say, well, I don't really care because I don't notice that they're not using it. I would appreciate if everyone pitched in, but their use doesn't inhibit mine. So either I don't care or I don't know to care about the free riders. So the issue that the free riders do, we think about our public goods, and suppose we think about a public park. And we're going to say that we have John and Susan. And they each have a choice to either contribute or not. And same thing, Susan has that choice to either contribute to the park or she cannot. Right? Whatever she wants to do, she can do. And we can turn this into is a game, right? Just like we were looking at with the oligopolies. We have two players and two games. So we have this public park, and we're going to say that the cost of the park is $20. So the cost, again, of this park is $20, and the value of the park is $15 each. So John gets $15 of benefit from it. Susan gets $15 of benefit of it. So their total benefit would be $30 of the park. But they have this choice to either contribute or not contribute. So, and what we're going to look at is kind of two things. If they contribute, well, it'll depend. So what I'm going to be noting is how much they each spend if they choose to contribute and the utility that they have. So if they both contribute, then I'll say that John pays $10, or I'll just phrase it this way. I'll say John and Susan both pay $10. then their utility from this park, or their net utility for John, will be the $15 of value that he gets minus the $10 that he spent. So John will have $5 of utility in net. And same thing with Susan. Susan gets $15 of benefit from this park, but she only pays $10, so she gets $5 of benefit. But then John realizes, well, there's no way to prevent me from using the park, so what if I don't pay? So if John doesn't pay, then John pays nothing, but Susan now has to pay the whole $20. And this is for the park to get built. So in this case, John is going to have $15 of satisfaction because John gets that $15 benefit, but he didn't spend anything, so uh, he's up 15. Whereas Susan now is actually worse off having built the park. That is, Susan's paying $20 for a good that she values at only $15, which is a loss. The same thing up here. If John chooses to contribute but Susan doesn't, then John pays 20 and Susan pays nothing. And this will be just the opposite of what we just saw, right? So in this case, John receives minus $5 of benefit, while Susan receives the whole 15. And if they both don't pay, this means again, John and Susan pay 0. But now there's no park built. In which case, John gets no benefit and Susan gets no benefit. Right? So if the park's not built, the park doesn't impact their well-being at all. So if we run through the situation, right, I'm going to say, well, if I'm John, right, what is my best situation to do? Am I better to contribute or not contribute? Now, as John, I'll put John in red, Susan in blue. If I'm John, if we both contribute, I get $5. I'm $5 to the good. However, if I choose not to contribute, then I'm $15 to the good, and I'd rather have that extra money to spend. So John, in this case, if he knows that Susan will contribute, he's going to want to not contribute. And similarly, if John knows that Susan won't contribute, he has a choice between paying more for this park than what he values it at, or receiving actually no benefit. In which case, I'd rather receive no benefit. And same thing for Susan. Susan has a choice to contribute or not contribute, and she would, in both cases, decide not to contribute. So what we see happen, the issue with the free rider problem is that people act in their own self-interest. That is, we call them rational. And then the park never gets built. Or the park never gets built, or we may also say that it does not get maintained, right? Whatever our $10 is for. Whatever. Right, so the park never gets built or maintained. So even though we would be better off up here where we both contribute, because I'm looking out for my self-interest, we're actually going to end up down here where neither of us are contributing. So we run into an issue of prisoner's dilemma. Right. And we have this question, why would we be a free rider? Simply because it's a rational thing to do, right? If you said, hey, you can either have a good for free or pay for a good, I'd rather not pay for the good, right? Just because that's a better deal for me. That's where I'd rather be. So again, we're just acting rationally, but we see that this rational behavior gets it where neither of us get the park, and we both, and instead of having $5 to good for each of us, now we're both, just meh. So what we need is a way to what we need is a way to um, incentivize, maybe mandate, but we're going to say incentivize people to contribute and to, we need to incentivize people so that we can end up here, right? Because that's our socially desirable outcome. That's where we want to be. So what we can do is we have a system is we want to make sure that everybody contributes and that we don't have our free riders. So what we can do to this is we have, again, the state, we have the government. So we have government spending and taxes, which kind of change the game a little bit. So if you decide to not pay your taxes, or you say, meh, I don't need to worry about taxes, you run into this issue of the IRS might show up at your door and arrest you, right? Not the people who call you and say, "Oh, we have your information because we found we found your car filled with drugs in Texas and $10,000 cash and right and whatever the new scam, whatever the IRS scam is this year, or I guess the IRS scam this year is going to be something about the stimulus package saying, "Oh, you need to send us $200 so that we can send you $2,400 or $1,200, whatever the case is." Um, Remember, the IRS won't call you uh, unsolicited, but we have government spending and taxes, so that now what our game turns into is, and we're kind of going from one extreme to the other. I doubt the IRS will come after you if you're $10 in debt to them. But what we see come up now is that we don't pay. If you don't pay, you also go to jail. And same thing up here. If Susan doesn't pay, she gets a ticket to jail. So what this does is this takes this 15, and then this we add in, you get to go to jail. Plus, you go to jail, minus 15 up here, then John goes to jail, and up here, if John does not pay, then John gets to go to jail. So when you have that threat of going to jail, you have a little bit more of an incentive to pay, or maybe there's a penalty where we say, well, if you don't pay this year, next year you'll have to pay $15, and then that can eventually, build up and so on. So again, we have these incentives to contribute, and the idea again, if I have a choice between $5 or $15 in the wild plus a trip to jail, now I'm going to go ahead and pay my taxes, and I end up in that spot where we both contribute. So that's what we do to kind of combat free riders and so on. The other thing that we can do to help with free riders is oftentimes the markets can still produce these goods, and they can do this through a relatively, what you might call an indirect way of charging for it. So if you listen to radio or you watch YouTube and you don't have YouTube Premium or anything like that, one of the things that you'll experience are advertisements, right? And even if you watch TV that's regular TV, not like regular satellite cable or live TV, right? You're going to watch ads, right? What these ads do is they help the stations, or they help the content creators generate revenue so that the ads pay for the ads are paying for your bill. Where at first, like, well, we say, oh, I don't want to watch the ads or whatever. But what the ads do is they make it where, well, no, you don't have to pay money. Instead, you pay your time, right? So you give the advertisers 30 minutes of your life. Well, I mean, it adds up, but you give them 30 seconds of life so that they can show you their product. Then after you see their product, you can watch your content. And the idea, again, the advertisers tell the content creators, or they tell YouTube, or some combination of the algorithm, hey, we'll pay you if you mention us in your video, or we'll pay you for that spot right before your video. And then they get paid, then the advertisers pay the content creators, and then we go out and buy the products that are advertised to us. So again, markets can provide these, even if it's an indirect way of charging for it, because if I'm listening to ads, I don't have to worry about contributing because I'm contributing with my time. I'm not getting my content. I'm not receiving the content I want to receive. Instead, I'm receiving an advertisement. The other thing that can help with our free riders is these last two are social pressures and personal appeals. Um, so one thing that you see, and in general, people who are doing something they shouldn't be doing, whether that be from whatever the case, oftentimes if you're doing something that you're not supposed to be doing, you think that people notice you more than they actually do, right? So if I have so if I have something on me that is illegal or something I shouldn't have, um, then while nobody's gonna notice me because I'm not the center of the world. So while I feel like everybody has their eyes on me because uh maybe I'm doing this thing that I shouldn't be doing, I shoplifted or something like that. Even though I feel like everybody's watching me, in reality, probably nobody is, right? Just because everybody's, minding their own business. But I have this social pressure where I feel like, oh, well, I shoplifted and now I feel like everybody knows that I shoplifted because I know it's there. So we have that social pressure and we also have personal appeal. Um, we like people to like us, right? Um, we're even introverts, we're social people, uh and we like when people like us, right? We enjoy being liked, and there's something about us where if you give a lot of people say, oh, it's better to give than to receive, right? That's the thing you hear around especially as you're getting into like your as a kid around Christmas time, you hear that a lot. Oh, I'd rather give than receive, yada yada. But to some degree, it's actually true, right? I mean, we enjoy helping people, and a lot of and most I think a lot of people, if not most people, enjoy saying, "Hey, I made somebody's day." Right? That's not something that we're like, "Oh, I just," right? We're not just gonna say, "Oh, I made someone else's day," and meh, whatever, right? For the most part, if we have that opportunity, it feels good and it's something we enjoy. So we have those personal appeals where I can say, well, I contributed to the park, or I contributed, and suppose right now we're not paying taxes. I contributed to this park, or I contributed to make this work out, and I feel better for it because it's something that I'm a part of. So again, we have these personal appeals, social pressures. You also don't want to be the one person that didn't contribute, I guess you might say. And to kind of demonstrate this, there are a few videos out there, but there are basically experiments done where they have like an honesty mart, something like that, where they say, all right, here's a bunch of cans of pop and some candy. Everything costs $1, and if if you're gonna take something, pay $1, but nobody's gonna know if you didn't, right? And they kind of run this experiment. And while yes, some people do end up taking without paying, and then at the end of the day, they'll say, well, how many pops are gone versus how many dollars do we have? And that'll, tell, what how people behave. Um, but what you see with those kind of projects is overwhelmingly people actually pay for the good, even though they don't have to, and there's nobody's gonna know if they didn't. Which again is just an idea of the social pressure. So again, I may say, well, if I don't pay for it, somebody's gonna see that I didn't pay for it, and I'm gonna be shamed, or maybe there's someone trying to catch me for shoplifting right around the corner, right? So again, social pressures can help us, you know, kind of do the right thing and pitch in when we can, and so on. And the last positive externality that we'll look at is public health programs. Um, so if we think about public health, we do see that as health improves, as the health market improves, we become better off. We become healthier. Um, so if we think about like our life expectancy, three things that are largely related to externalities and public health. The first thing is those public sanitation systems. Um, Pretty much almost anywhere in the country, if you at least most places in the country, uh, you have even if it's not good water, it's relatively clean water. It's safe to drink, and a boil advisory is the exception. We also have, sewage systems pretty much everywhere you go, and so on. So sanitation, for the most part, isn't an issue in the country. Medical discoveries help with, everything. Um, Not everything, but so if we have like immunizations, vaccines, finding out about immunizations. I'm going to pick on immunizations actually. But one of the things going on with the virus right now, I'll be done in a couple minutes. One of the things with the virus right now is we're saying, well, if everyone was immune to it, it'd be easy. And the test that, at least the test that I would like to have, is the one that says, have you had it or are you already immune to it? And what that'll tell you is maybe I had the coronavirus, a couple months ago and it went through me and I'm good now, or maybe I am asymptomatic or I was asymptomatic, right? So stuff like that can help. It can help one with people's health, but two, even in something like this, if we could figure out who all has had it and who hasn't had it, or who's immune or who could carry it, you know, that could potentially, you know, put our economy in a lot better of a spot, and it could put our whole country in a better position. So, immunizations, antibiotic, and all that stuff, medical discoveries that helped uh, increase your longevity. And same thing if we have like some public service announcements. Throughout the history, we've had hand washing, PSAs saying, "Hey, make sure you store your food properly and cook it right." Um, for the reducing tobacco, we have what's it called? I think it's called Truth or something like that, or Above the Influence, and stuff like that. But even now, a couple of the PSAs that are coming out are to, they're kind of really emphasizing to stay home, and whether we like that PSA or not, it's there. It's something that's going on, and we also have the PSAs saying, hey, if you do have to go out, keep your distance from people, and all that good stuff. So we have this public behavior. We say, hey, if we can alter public behavior, we can convince people to take go behave one way instead of another. That could potentially make society better off from a health perspective. So this is what I have for chapter 13, uh, and yeah, that's what I have for chapter 13. Thanks for watching.